back to my channel. My name is Laura and today's video is about nursing. I'm actually comparing what it's like to be a nurse in a big center or a big city to what it's like to be a nurse in a small center. I came from a small city and I moved to Toronto in 2018. I wanted to come to the big city to learn how to be a better emerg nurse, how to be a better emerg nurse in a large trauma center downtown Toronto. I was just very interested in pushing the limits in terms of my skills and learning what another hospital had to offer. So I'm just hoping that this video is either entertaining for you if you're just curious what goes on in other centers, in other provinces or internationally, or I just hope it's helpful if you're looking to move to a bigger city or vice versa. Maybe this will give you some insight into what it will be like. I know I would have loved to have seen a video like this when I was about to move. I think it would have been reassuring. I definitely, despite the fact that I wanted to push the limits in terms of my nursing career, I was also very nervous. And I remember standing outside of the emergency department that I was about to start in when I first moved to Toronto and seeing so many ambulances at the door. And I almost had a panic attack because I was like, oh my gosh, that is 3 times the amount of trucks that would show up at our emerge. I can't manage that many patients at once. What am I gonna do? Anyway, we'll dive into it. And my comparison of the two size centers, and hopefully I'll have a little bit more clear outlook on what it's like living in the big city. So jumping into it, you would think that patient volumes would be one of the biggest differences working in a bigger center. That is not true. At least I didn't find that to be true. Of course, bigger centers are going to see more patients, but they're gonna have bigger emerges and more staff, and that was correct. I didn't notice in terms of my assignment in nursing, in terms of how many patients I saw, I didn't really notice a massive difference or feel more stress in that respect. I did, however, notice an increase in the acuity of the patients that showed up in emerge, and sometimes I felt the stress in that way. I was just seeing more ICU patients, more sick patients in the emergency department, and had to learn to manage that. Depending on the hospital in the city, there's so many hospitals in a big city, you're gonna see different volumes at different hospitals. There are some community hospitals in Toronto that see tons and tons of patients, as opposed to some bigger centers that see less patients. And you would think it to be the opposite. It just really depends on the geographical area, but emerge is emerge. Patients just keep coming. I'd say every emergency department is just busy. Every hospital is busy, the way it is. So one big difference that I did notice coming to the big city was the patient population that I was seeing. I saw a much greater homeless population working in Toronto than I did in a smaller city, and I think that's just a given. In any larger city, you're going to see more homeless patients. It taught me so much, despite it being very heartbreaking. It taught me how to navigate the system, everything that this population needed for assistance. I never really expected, and this, I don't know, this sounds maybe small in comparison, but I never expected that you donate clothes to Goodwill or to whatever service that takes clothing donations, and these clothes go to this population. But I never expected to actually be handing these clothes to patients. And the winters in Canada are very challenging. Giving warm clothing to the population so that they can be safely on the street in the winter months was a very powerful experience, and I would say a more valuable experience, an eye-opening experience than even working on the trauma team. You also notice a huge difference in the culture and the cultural diversity. Living in a bigger city, you have to learn how to use translational services effectively and efficiently. We actually use in the hospital that I work in now, which I don't work in emerge at the moment, we use an iPad that's on an IV pole, and we wheel it around if we need it, and you can bring it right to the patient's bedside. It's incredible. You can video call if the patient needs to read lips, or if they need sign language, you can call any language, bring it right to the patient. If they're hard of hearing, it's actually very easy to hear. And it feels like you have that third person right in the room with you. And when I worked in emerge, we were using speakerphones. And if you think of it, like that person's already going through a health challenge, they have that language barrier, they're probably hard of hearing. Speakerphones for anyone on a good day are difficult to hear. So they were, you just like, you don't fully communicate when you have all those challenges there, and that's just not fair. Having this tool in our current our current department, sorry, is so effective and eliminates those gaps and those barriers in having a language barrier. I would say if you have a chance to work with different cultures, whether that be in a more diverse city or if you're traveling and doing travel nursing, it is incredibly beneficial to you as a person, your career, and just your ability to give back to others. There's so many hospitals in Toronto and in big cities. Each hospital has its own thing or specialty or many specialties. Depending on the hospital that you work in, you're going to see more of those patients. So that's something to be mindful of if you move to a bigger city versus a smaller city. In a small city, you see anything and everything because generally you're the only hospital or you're the main center for that area. Whereas in a bigger city, example, the emergency that I worked in, we saw lots of trauma patients, we saw stroke and neurosurge and cardiac, but we also saw a lot of CF patients because that was the CF center, and I had no idea that I was going to be seeing CF patients to the extent that I did. I learned so much. Coming to a big city, I think you need to be adaptable. You need to be open to change. If you're working in a community hospital in a big city, less so, but if you are coming to a large academic research center, you need to expect that it is going to be an environment that is forever changing. That was the emergency department that I worked in. There's a research building attached to the hospital. We were forever trying to improve patient flow, providing better care, the most, innovative care that there could possibly be. I found that I used my more complex acute care, critical care skills working in the big city. And I mean like art line management, using the rapid transfuser, those sort of skills I would use on a regular basis in the emergency department. And some emergency departments would never use art lines, but it was an expectation in my big city emerge that any ICU patient receive their art line in the emergency department. And I think that just had to do with the skills of residents and physicians and just the volumes to which we'd see very sick patients. Whereas working in a smaller center, you don't get to hone in on those skills as much, but you get to really maintain and learn skills that are potentially skills that residents or learners might do in a bigger city. So an example of this would be assisting in chest tube insertion, assisting in a broken limb reduction, assisting in or pushing the medications in a broken limb reduction. I know it definitely depends on the center, but I know in my smaller center, we would use an RT in our procedural sedations, and the nurse would often push the medications. Working in my bigger city emerge, we would not have an RT there because we'd have 2 physicians. This also depends on physician billing in your province. Won't get into that right now, but the nurse would be more responsible for the airway in this instance, and one of the physicians would actually push the medications in the limb reduction, and then you'd have another physician or ortho resident doing the reduction. So just kind of depends on your team. The difference that I noticed in med students and residents, I don't mean this to offend anyone whatsoever. This is just my observation, and I actually found it quite interesting. Residents in both areas, very strong, assessment skills strong, the way they manage patients, great. There's also gonna be, wonderful residents and not so wonderful residents. That's just life. The skill sets of the residents in larger centers, so the more complex skill sets or advanced skill sets, they were stronger. So I've just found residents were better at putting in art lines and chest tubes, and that's kind of those are my main examples right now. But they were better in the bigger city, likely just because they were able to practice the skills more often as opposed to the residents in the smaller city. Med students, definitely a big difference. Med students are kind of hands-off in a bigger city, and I think it's just because there are so many learners in the hospital, and so they don't get to do as much. Whereas in smaller cities, sometimes they're acting as residents because there's not, as many learners, or there's no one on that service that's on call. So I actually found med students coming out of smaller centers much stronger and much more hands-on. And you wouldn't think that when you look at bigger schools, because bigger schools in bigger cities are generally harder to get into, more competitive. But my honest opinion, med students coming out of smaller schools, much stronger. I'm gonna touch on trauma team. I came to Toronto because I wanted to learn what it was like to work within a big city trauma team. Sometimes it's just way too many hands in a room and just too many people, too many services, no need. And I think you can manage traumas in both settings. It's great if you need like anesthesia there for a very difficult intubation, or you need surgery right there, or if you're running your patient to the OR, it just really allows for that seamless handoff and seamless connection from trauma room to OR. You just need to have a good leader in the room to effectively manage a trauma. So that wraps up my comparison on what it's like to work as a nurse in the big city versus a small city. I hope this was at least entertaining for you. Any questions or requests on what kind of nursing videos you would like to see, please leave a comment down below. I would love to put out content that you would love to see. Like, subscribe, and thank you for watching my channel. I will see you in my next video. Bye.